regarding people.
(7:00), and I'd like to call the May 5th meeting of the Finance Advisory Committee to order. May 5th, 2021, City of Albany. And could we please have a roll call?
Sure. Committee Member Pavlia?
Here.
Committee Member Priven?
Here.
Committee Member Trainer?
Here.
Committee Member Banker is out, and so Chair Carr.
Present. And the first order of the agenda is approval of minutes from April 7th, 2021. So are there any comments or corrections to the minutes? If not, we'll motion to approve.
Yes, I have some comments. I'm a little disappointed about we had some input about the work plan and subjects that we might want to have for future agenda items. And I don't see anything in here about it. And then in particular, I submitted a page document that was the summary of the ordinance. And I don't know why that wasn't included into it as a document, because it basically summarized what I was saying, and we had it all in written format. And I'd like that added to the minutes.
So I can have Anne correct me if I am wrong, but committee member minutes are just, what is the word, action minutes. And so they only report on the action that was taken. They don't generally include detail.
Correct.
Are there other comments from other committee members on the minutes from April 7th? If not, I move to approve.
Wait, I'd like to make a motion to add what I added, which was this document. I submitted a written document, and when people submit comments, I guess I would like to have them included.
They can be included on the city website as part of the packet, but they will not be included as part of the minutes. So for example, like at council meeting, a lot of time when people submit public comments, or sometimes even public comment after the fact, or sometimes there are presentation slides, we add them to the agenda packet after the fact, and it is part of the public record for the agenda packet.
So then I can get that submitted as part of the public record? Okay.
So with that advisement, I would once again like to move approval of the minutes with the recommendation from member Papalia that we include his submitted comments, reference to those as part of the minutes, if we can do that, and still stay true to our action minutes approach to recording minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Committee Member Pavlia?
Aye.
Committee Member Priven?
I'm going to abstain since I wasn't there.
Vice Chair Trainer?
Aye.
and Chair Carr.
Aye.
So that passes.
Okay, are there any announcements from any of the committee members present? I welcome those at this time. Seeing none, I will open item number 4 for public comment. This, I believe, is public comment on items on or off the agenda. Am I correct, Heather?
It's off the agenda.
Off the agenda. Okay, so any public comment?
Do not see any attendees.
I don't see any attendees that would make that comment, so we'll move to item number 6, discussion and possible action matters related to the following items.
So
So we're going to do a little repeat introduction. The committee members introducing themselves. Oh, I'm sorry. I've shifted. I'm back on the apologize. I've gone back to April 7th. I was hoping to capture Francesco's concerns, and I went all the way back to April 7th to do that. But here I am now at public comment, and presentations is 5.1. So Heather, apologize for the confusion there. Can you go ahead and give us our introduction to Albany Finance?
yes, so I am going to share a PowerPoint. And this is something that is just a generic, here is what you're going to see in general throughout the course of reviewing the city's finances. So there are different types of funds when you think about municipal finance. You have your general fund, which is where most of your taxes and any fees to recover costs associated with city time go. It's what you normally think of when I give you the budget to actuals. It's the operating of the city. And then you have enterprise or business type funds. The one that the city has is our sewer fund. I am thinking about making the storm drain fund also an enterprise fund. I've been talking to the auditors about that. I need to do a little bit more research on that. So right now, our only enterprise fund is our sewer fund. And that is because it is completely self-funded by fees, sewer assessment. We have special revenue funds. So this is where your parcel taxes go. Or for example, we get revenue from Alameda County Transportation Commission, and that goes into its own fund and is tracked separately. We have CIP funds. You will see as we go through that you have both, our operating budget, and then you also have the CIP budget that is done by Public Works. Those are for capital projects. It's our capital improvement plan. So larger road repair, building repair, parks updates, big things like that. And then we have our capital reserve funds, and those are basically savings accounts for different equipment and projects depending on the department that has the fund. So we have a number of different council policies that are passed at the council level and that the Financial Advisory Committee is tasked with reviewing. We have our general fund reserve policy. That basically is a guideline for how much the city should hold in reserve just in case. When we originally passed this, I had used the Government Finance Officer Association's risk analysis to determine how much should be held in reserve. And it was determined that the city should hold approximately 25%. So we put 25% of current budgeted operational expenditures in reserve. So the goal is to have a general fund balance reserve of 25%. The policy also goes into detail on how anything above and beyond that 25% should be spent. We have a capital reserve fund policy that was also recently passed. It establishes equipment reserves for public works, fire, police, IT, recreation. There might be another one. And it gives minimum funding for those. And these are, it details when those reserves should be used and when you can dip below that minimum funding. And then we have the investment policy that comes to council every year. There are a lot of restrictions around investments for municipal organizations, and they're based on state law. So the investment policy is mostly along those guidelines. There are a few options that we get to make that, the investment policy helps with. There are future policies that I would like to bring to the council and would come to the Financial Advisory Committee before they go to council. A debt service policy. A lot of municipalities look at their overall budget and their overall tax base, and they set basically a top amount that they think that it's normally a percentage, that they think that they can take on in debt. And it basically helps when we're thinking about buying larger assets, fire trucks, say we needed to do a general obligation bond to catch up on some like paving projects, large things like that. It allows the staff to kind of get information together and put together a plan before bringing it to council when there's already a guideline there of how much debt can we take on, how do we want to balance debt with savings, and really what is the city's overall idea of how they want to fund projects. And then I'd also like to bring an asset policy that talks about disposals. Obviously, whenever we dispose of an asset, we try to get as much money as we can. If things are basically written off as a loss, what should we do with them then? Does the city council want us to donate them? I bet no one wants us to come every time we need to get rid of a computer. So having a policy around that would help with kind of guiding what staff do when we dispose of assets and, how assets are recorded and monitored and things like that. So we have a number of different types of revenues. The first and the majority of what you think of when you think of city revenues are taxes. The funds are used for city operations. All taxes must be approved by voters. And in the state of California, there are a lot of rules and laws about how we can raise taxes. The next option that the city has are fees. Fees can be charged to recover the cost for certain city services. So you think about when you take a recreation class, you pay a fee. When you have to, get a permit and the city staff have to review all the plans and everything, you may have to pay a fee. So fees do not have to be approved by voters, but they cannot make money for the city. They can only recover costs. If something is making money for the city, is bringing in above and beyond the cost of the service, it is considered a tax and would have to go to the voters. And then we have assessments, which are, the assessments for sewer, storm drain, and things like that.
Heather, can I just stop you for a second? What's going to be the easiest for you? Would it be easiest for you for us to interrupt and ask questions as we go through these, or would you like to finish the presentation so we can stop? Okay, I just want to clarify. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask at this point? 2 slides in, and how many are we going? How deep is this?
9 slides.
Okay, cool.
Good question.
Trying not to overwhelm.
That's good. Thank you.
I have a quick question. How does the city calculate the city's cost in terms of fees?
So there are a number of different ways that we do that. And in certain cases, we actually hire consultants to do cost surveys for us. We recently did that with community development. We brought in a consultant to review, how much time, community development obviously provided all the numbers for how much time they spend on certain items. And then I provided the budget of how much, each staff hourly rate, what their benefits are, what, they spend a year in like office supplies and printing and things like that. And then the consultant compared all of those things and said, okay, here's the cost in total for community development, and here's the time that the staff say that they spend on these certain items. So here's what it would cost here's what the fee should be to recover the cost of that particular item. So in certain cases, there's outside consultants that are brought in. In some cases, we simply increase it by CPI, and then every once in a while, we'll do, a more detailed analysis. In some cases, it's pretty dollar for dollar. So the city attorney's fees, we put on the master fee schedule the exact fee that the city attorney charges hourly in our contract.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this slide lists all of our taxes. There are a lot of them. So our property taxes, we have ad valorem taxes, which are basically on the value of the property. We have the county charges a 1% and the city gets a portion of that. And then we have our general obligation bond. So the ad valorem taxes are what are capped. Prop 13 capped those, the increase in those, so that they can't go over a certain amount every year you own your house. That's what is capped when you think of Prop 13 and you think of the property taxes not being able to rise over a certain amount. So there's the county 1%. General obligation bonds are outside of Prop 13 if the bonds have to go to the voters. And so if the voters approve a bond measure, the city basically, I get the information from the assessor that says, here's what all of the taxable valuation of the city properties are this year. And I say, okay, I have that amount and we need to pay this much for the bond. So I, every year, compare the taxable value to the amount due for that year for the bond and determine what the rate is for each property. And then pension tax override is also something that is above and beyond Prop 13 because of the sweet spot for where ours was added to the city charter. And so that is capped at 0.0993% of property values. And then we have a number of parcel taxes. Again, taxes have to go to voters. So these were all approved by voters. Parcel taxes are for specific things, and they're considered one of those special funds, special revenue funds that I was talking about earlier. And they have to be passed by voters with a 60%, a two-thirds margin. So if you want a parcel tax that is, or any tax that is for a specific thing, it has to pass with a 2/3 margin. General taxes that go into the general fund and can be used for whatever we want are only passed with a majority vote. Currently, we have an EMS and an ALS tax for medical, for EMS, emergency medical services, ALS is advanced life support. Those are used to fund part of like the ambulance and that kind of stuff, equipment for them. We have a sidewalk parcel tax that helps fund sidewalk repairs. We have two different library taxes, a library parcel tax and a supplemental library. They originally were to fund extended hours at the library above and beyond what the county was going to fund. And so, and they also include the ability to spend them on some other library items. And then we have our LLD, which is our Lighting and Landscaping District parcel taxes. And those are for some parks things and other things like that. So those are our property taxes, and you'll see those on your property tax bill. And then we have other taxes. We have sales, use, and transaction taxes. The sales and use taxes are the portion that we get of the state and county. And then we have transaction taxes, and that is that 0.5% that the city charges for. It is not a sales tax. The state will be very upset with you if you call it a sales tax. It is a transaction tax. A lot of people call it a sales tax, the local sales tax. And then we have a sugar sweetened beverage tax. We talked about that a little bit last week. The sugar sweetened beverage tax is a general tax. However, the way the ordinance was written, it says that while it is a general tax, the voters would like to see that the council tries to use it in certain ways, and it requires a study session be done each year to talk about different health aspects and things like that. So we will be having a study session along with the first council study session on the budget for sugar sweetened beverage tax on May 17th. Then we have our business license taxes. Those are also general taxes. Staff are hoping to bring those to, we're working on a contract to review the license taxes, the ordinance, the municipal code, and potentially modernize the code and update the tax. And that is also something that would come to you guys for review after we've done that analysis. We also have racetrack taxes. We have utility users taxes. They're on communications, electric, gas, and now water. We just added water. We have property transfer tax, and then we have hotel tax. We have a lot of taxes. Any questions on those?
Yeah, I just like to echo Francesco Papaglia's concern earlier that it would be helpful to me to understand what percentage of the overall tax base each of these items is.
Sure.
So he described it as a pie chart. It could be any number of other
Yeah, I've done.
graphical representations, but it'd be helpful to know, is a sugar sweetened beverage tax that we all get excited about and exercised about, is it a big part or a small part of our overall budget?
It's $250,000.
Exactly. Yeah. So that'd be
Oftentimes when sugar sweetened beverage tax is presented, it is lumped in with the sales, use, and transactions taxes.
Mhm.
So it is not often separated out in things like the pie charts, but I can specifically narrow that one out if people would like. That is something that I generally provide with the biennial budget.
Okay.
Property taxes are the majority of our revenue. Then come sales and use taxes, and then the rest of it gets real small.
Thank you.
It sort of looks to me like of the taxes that are mentioned on the right side of the slide, that almost maybe everything under sales, use, and transaction taxes, would that fall into the franchise and other taxes revenue line from your presentation?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. Well, sugar sweetened beverage taxes with sales, use, and transaction taxes.
Okay.
Then the rest are under. And we'll get to franchise fees later.
Okay.
But franchise fees are fees, not taxes. But they've been described as taxes in the past. But anyway, so any other questions on this slide?
Yes. First a comment I would like in the future that you minimize uses of acronyms, like EMS, ALS, because you say it and then I forget what it is. And this is something that's goal is to educate the public, and it can get, these acronyms can be pretty, well, it's just not helpful if you're not a professional. Just a minor thing that I think it's an ad valorem tax, VALOR, value. But those are just the comments. I didn't quite understand what you said about sales use and transaction tax, because you said it's really a transaction tax. People call it a sales tax. And is this the one that includes online purchases?
So in theory, they all include online purchases. Sales use and transaction taxes function in the same way. They are on the point of sale. When we think about online, where online sales are recorded for tax purposes recently changed from what was a distribution basically centered approach to point of sale, so where it's delivered. In theory, everything should be point of sale. However, with the transaction taxes, it's basically inadministrable for each individual company to track the thousands of taxing jurisdictions that they would need to. So we get a portion of the county pool. There are some things that go into the county pool that basically are distributed between all the municipalities in the county in regards to these funds. But they're all the same. You can get into really nuanced details. For example, the transaction taxes apply to gas, whereas the sales and taxes do not, because at the state level, there's excise tax, not sales tax on those items. But since the city doesn't have an excise tax, we charge the transaction tax. So, but in general, they all are on the same type of thing, which is just the purchases that you make. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
I have a quick question. Does the city tax short-term rentals like Airbnb or whatever? And if so,
that would fall under the hotel tax.
Okay.
It's technically, so in our charter, it's called the hotel tax. When you're thinking about it in the grand scheme of taxation, it's often called transient occupancy tax. It's the same thing. And the hotel tax does apply to Airbnb. That's something that we recently started enforcing. In the legal review of our hotel tax, it was determined that Airbnb type rentals do apply. So we sent out a notice that said, we're starting to enforce this. So be prepared. And people have started to remit that tax.
And Heather, if I may, just one drill down a little bit on the transaction tax. How would anyone in Albany advocate to the county as to their equation or algorithm or whatever they use to allocate our share of the taxes back to the city of Albany?
I'm honestly not sure.
Okay.
I can look into that. I know that it is based on the recording of other revenues for the sales and use taxes. And basically they just say, okay, well, we assume that if you made this many purchases, in brick and mortar, we assume that you also made that many purchases online.
Yeah.
But I will see who is in charge of that at the county.
That'd be useful. Thank you.
Any other questions? So our other revenues are fees, like we talked about earlier. Most of these are set by the master fee schedule. There is a public hearing involved in setting these fees. We do it once a year. We're going to be doing it along with the biennial budget this year. Often the fees are increased by CPI. However, a review, is done by third parties at certain times. Franchise fees get tricky because they're authorized at the federal level and often have to do with, cable utilities and the use of city right-of-ways for certain things. But those fees are negotiated. Some of them are set by the feds, and some are negotiated in agreements that we have with different providers. And then we have our assessments, our sewer assessment and our stormwater assessment. Those are all done by third parties. We contract with them to review how much it costs to run these things. And we then assess those things on property tax bills. And then we have investment income, which ties into the investment policy from before. Any questions on these? Okay. So expenses. We have a number of different types of expenses as well. So we have our operating expenses, which you see in your general fund budget to actuals, and their salaries and benefits, just normal expenses that you think of when you think about running the city. We have our special revenue expenses. Those are items that are specifically related to those partial taxes mostly, but also towards, like I was talking about, the Alameda County Transportation Commission funds that we code specific expenses to them because those funds can only be used for those things. We have the reserve fund expenses that we talked about earlier. These are larger items that don't happen every year that we're trying to save for. I generally try to explain the budget to people as my operating expenses are in the general fund that I want to record in the general fund are the things that I'm going to pay regardless of where the funding source comes from. Regardless of where the money comes from, I'm going to pay the public works director's salary. I'm going to pay the city manager's salary. So all of those things should be recorded in the general fund. And then if they can be covered by special revenue funds, we should do a transfer to cover those costs. That way, the things that are in the general fund show a true picture of how much it costs to run the city. The things that are in special revenue funds are things that we wouldn't do except for having those special revenues. So for example, some of the parks improvements that we're going to be making will come out of the Measure M fund, the new parks and open space parcel tax that was passed 2018. And so those funds, some of those improvements wouldn't have happened except for now we have these funds to pull from. The reserve funds, when you look at your operating budget and you look at your general fund, you want it to be consistent. You don't want to see these spikes because you need to know how to plan. Well, your reserve funds, you're going to see those spikes because you're going to see that I'm putting money in for a fire truck and then year 15, I spend $1 million. And then I spend, a couple $100,000 to buy, or probably $100,000 to buy breathing units. And then $1 million 15 years later. So you don't want to include that in your operating budget because you don't want this, but the reserve, that's what they're for. The reserve funds are there to start saving. Now, with the debt policy that I was talking about before, we might end up bonding as well or borrowing for certain items, like a fire truck. So we're not going to save $1 million necessarily over 15 years. Or, we find out we need a fire truck tomorrow and we haven't saved anything. So we have to bond, right? So there's a combination of those things, but the reserve funds are for those expenses that only happen every so many years that we need to save for or plan ahead for. And then we have the CIP expenses, which are, design and engineering, construction, the large projects that the city does. Questions on that?
I guess I'll ask one question now that was going to come as part of the review. But so you mentioned in the third quarter report about transfers in and these happening at year end because you need to have the actuals for the year so that you'll know what you can transfer in. Is that referring to transferring in from the special reserve funds? Okay.
Yep, the special revenue funds. The pension tax override is one of them. The pension tax override can only be used for the pensions equivalent to the amount that was provided as a benefit in 1971. So if we increased the benefit offered to staff after 1971, the tax can't be used to fund the increase in the benefit. Can only fund the benefit that is similar to the one that was offered in 1971. So at the end of the year, I have to do an analysis of, okay, how much did we actually spend on pensions? How much of that is applicable? And then I make the transfer. One of the things that I can't do until the end of the year is the transfer actually out to the EMS and ALS fund. That fund runs at a deficit. So the general fund makes up those expenses. And I don't know until we've done all our year-end entries exactly how much that deficit is. And I don't want to transfer too much. So I wait until pretty much September to do the entry for June 30.
So you just do an accrual or do you how do you actually that?
It's all accounting magic. All of the money is in one account. Well, it's in a couple of accounts, hence the accounting sheet.
So you book the transfer from one fund to the other after you've closed the year and you know what the actual expenses are.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no actual transfer of money. It's just a record keeping item. The only item that is specifically kept separate is the closed police and fire pension plan, because that is a trust fund that the city is responsible for.
When did that close?
1971.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Now to how we budget. So the city passes a biennial budget in odd years. It is basically the biennial budget is passed after new council member. Well, I guess we get new council members all the time, but passing a 2-year budget gives council time to focus on other things. Because if we passed a budget every year, you'd always be focused on budgeting. Passing the biennial budget, even though you come with adjustments in the next year, allows you to basically take the strategic plan that the council comes up with and set those things in motion. The budget must be approved by July 1st, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. Amendments are often made mid-year. That is one thing I was actually really proud of the past couple of years, is we budgeted well enough that we did not need to do mid-year adjustments. And then adjustments are also made before the start of the second year. Additional appropriations can be made at any time. The council just needs to have a resolution that says, yes, we agree that we want to reappropriate or some funds that were going to be used for something else for, this new project, or we have an excess over the 25% of the general fund balance, so we want to use it for something else. So additional appropriations can be made at any time. They just have to go before council with a resolution. Questions? All right. Last slide, I promise. So generally, what we do when we budget is finance starts in December, putting together all of the information, doing an analysis of, okay, what have we spent in the past compared to what we budgeted? Does an account really need that much money in it? Have we under budgeted? Should we increase the budget? We start projecting salary costs based on MOU changes, all of the things that I can do on my end to start putting together the new budget. Then in January, we reach out to the department heads and say, hey, here's the suggestions that we have. Do you really think that I am completely off the mark? Or do you know that there are any changes that, say, council has asked us to do a new program or something, and so you know that you're going to need more money in one place, or something like that? Have there been any changes that we need to adjust for in the budget? And so, department heads and I've been told that I can rate department heads over the coals, because I will test them. I'll say, okay, why do you need this? Because I need to come to you guys and say, this is why we need this. So the department heads and I go back and forth on the budget, and then it goes to the city manager, and we have to defend to the city manager what we're doing. And when we then bring the budget for public review, whether it be by the finance committee or whether it be by the council, we are bringing to the public what we as professionals think that it is going to cost to run the programs and services that we currently run or that we have been asked to run at current service levels or optimal service levels. And so then it is up to, the public, the council, to decide, and you guys to, help say whether you agree with or not, whether the services are worth it. So at this point, we are budgeting at a deficit. So, we're staff are working really hard to try to get that down operationally or find new revenue sources. But at some point, it might come to, what services are most important to us at a policy level. So the budget that the city manager presents is the budget that we think it's going to cost to run the services that we have been tasked with. And then it's up to you guys. So, any questions on that?
I have a question in general. If this is the last slide, is that?
It is.
Okay, so yeah, so this might go back to some earlier stuff, but and all the talk about funds and all that, I didn't hear much about pensions. So I'm just wondering, where do pension liabilities and assets sit? That's the first question. And then the second question is, in terms of policies, I didn't hear anything about pensions. So I'm wondering, is there any stated goal or policy about how much pensions would be funded, what percent, or any kind of goal or policy regarding that?
No, there is no policy. So it depends on which pension we're talking about. The city has two different pension sources. We have the closed police and fire pension plan that the city is completely responsible for, and I call it it doesn't have any revenue, so it's its own thing, really. It's another type of fund, I guess. And we have a number of assets that we that we administer. And in the quarterly update, there's a second attachment that is the listing of all of the cash and investments that the city has. And the pension is listed at the bottom of that. This is for the closed police and fire pension plan. That fund is pretty low funding right now. And that's on purpose. The actuarial determined contributions have started to be almost as much as the annual payments to pensioners. There's only 18 pensioners left. And so at some point, the city is going to have to, and at some point the city is going to have to decide whether they want to just pay the pensioners and draw down the assets. And, if it's going to be the same amount either way, or do we make the contribution each year? So that's kind of something that's up in the air right now. And so that's the closed police and fire pension plan. It only has, I think, 18 members in it. The investments are monitored by the Police and Fire Pension Board. And then we also have Calpers. Active employees are in Calpers. Calpers holds all the assets. Calpers, all of that. The city has the responsibility of, the city has seven or eight CalPERS plans. There are safety plans. So there are two police plans. There's a tier 1, and then there's what's called PEPRA, the Public Employee Pension Reform Act. So anyone after 2013 that entered service after 2013 is a PEPRA member. It has lower benefits because, shockingly, everyone's like, oh, hi, this costs a lot of money. And so there's a tier 1, and then there's PEPRA for police. There's tiers 1 and 2 and PEPRA for fire. And then there's miscellaneous tier 1, miscellaneous tier 2, and PEPRA for miscellaneous, which is, SEIU, unrepresented, anyone other than police and fire. And so because the city has so many plans and we only have, 109 employees that participate, or active employees that participate in the plan, there's like a couple of plans that have 1 or 2 people in them and a couple of plans that have a little bit more. So CalPERS put us in pooled plans. So we're pooled for liability purposes with a number of other municipalities that were in the same type of plan and had under 100 people in it. You got pooled. And so all of those assets are pooled at CalPERS, and we have a portion of it. And depending on the plan, some of our CalPERS plans are more funded than others. I think overall we're about 72% funded, 72 to 74, something like that. We do not have a policy on where we want to be. We could go all day talking about the theory of whether you should be 100% funded or whether you should keep your money. So CalPERS does charge us 7% on our unfunded liability that they determined. They just recently changed their unfunded liability payment from 30 years to 20 years. So that's part of the reason why our unfunded liability payments are increasing so drastically over the next 9 to 12 years. And so.
Can I just ask a question? So just thank you. I mean, that's
sorry,
a lot of information, but I mean, I guess so in my mind, I'm just thinking at the end of the day, it's like we have an account with CalPERS. I mean, it sounds like we have many accounts, but CalPERS keeps track of our assets. Calpers keeps track of our liabilities. If we
Mhm.
wanted to pay more, pay less, whatever, they would give us credit or not credit or whatever.
Correct.
It's super more complicated than that, but that's kind of how it works. Is that right?
Correct. We don't track the assets. We don't track. They're on our financial statements as a liability, but it's what Calpers tells us it is.
Right. And then we have an asset too, I assume. That's what Calpers is
Yes.
doing on our behalf.
Yep.
Right.
Our portion of whatever Calpers' billions of investments is.
But that's not it's not considered like a special fund or whatever when you were going through those.
Nope.
In the beginning. It's just part of, okay.
It's, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think maybe it's a topic for another meeting, but it would be really helpful to know what you see the trajectory of those payments as being over the next 10 years. And if they're going to double or triple or what they're going to do, because I have a feeling that it's this big number that's out there. And it would be helpful to know what the trajectory of those expenses is going to be.
So we had an outside analysis done in, I think the presentation went to council in April of last year, maybe. And it will double by, I think it caps out at 2032. In 2032, our annual unfunded pension liability is estimated to be about 5 million, when right now it's 2.5. It's a little bit less than that, but it's going up to 2.5 for next year. And that's annually.
So what does that mean for our contributions toward that plan on an annual basis?
It means that we're going to have to come up with another $2 million a year.
So that's huge.
Yeah, it's not a small number.
Yeah, I echo. It just sounds like something we could probably derail this whole conversation, this whole meeting about that. But yeah, maybe for a future day, if we could drill into that, because it sounds like it's going to be a pretty material topic.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Any other questions on this?
Heather, thanks for an excellent presentation. I just had one quick question, and you presented the budget timeline, but I'm curious as to how any kind of auditing process would or would not impact the budget timeline that you presented.
So this year, it did kind of set me back a little bit. In theory, I mean, the auditors are already starting. They are coming to do their interim audit work soon-ish. And by coming, I mean, not actually coming anymore because of the pandemic. It's going to be all electronic. But so they do interim audit work in May, and then they've generally scheduled our audit to start in September. And it depends on how quickly we can turn around some of the information. The past, it's been kind of difficult because of the history, but we've resolved a lot of that history. And so we're getting on everything's much smoother now. So in theory, we should have all of the city's work wrapped up by, September. So it's then on the auditors and we're just answering questions. The past couple of years, there have been a couple snags where the auditors come back and say, hey, what's going on with this? And it's taken us a lot more time to dig into what's going on with this. And so it's pushed us back. And that's kind of why we're not going to be bringing the budget I would prefer to bring the budget sooner, but we just haven't had the ability because we were working on the audit.
Okay, thank you for that response. Member Papalia.
What is the timeline of audits on a regular basis? Is it a yearly thing? And so did we have an audit last year?
Yes, we completed a full, they call it a CAFR, it's a comprehensive annual financial report for 2020, and that is available on the website.
And did that result in anything of note from the audit?
There are a handful of findings. They're all repeat findings. There are less. We did resolve 4 of the 9 findings from 2019, and we've made progress on the rest of them. I'm hoping to resolve a handful of the remaining ones this year and then really dig in next year. So yes, there were findings on the audit, and we are working towards resolving a lot of those.
Can you share with us any of those findings? Or?
They're all listed in they're posted on the website as part of the comprehensive annual financial report. Some municipalities don't post them, but we do.
So the public, I and the public can find it where on the Albany website under
the finance department, under budgets and financial reports.
Okay.
Any other comments from the committee? If not, we can move to if we have any public comment, and we can open it up for public comment if there is any at this time. Last call for committee members. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Any public comment? If you are in the public and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand.
All right. I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
Are there people? I can't see.
There's
Yes.
one attendee.
Well, there is one attendee at this time. Thank you for checking. And with that, I think we're going to move on to the quarter update. Heather, do you need to take a drink of water or a break? You were talking.
I'm all set.
You're good to go? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you take it from here, and we'll have the quarter update.
Sure.
Third quarter 2021.
So I will share the same thing that I shared last night, and everyone can see the third quarter update, right?
Yep. I can.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm going to need to see what was submitted to council, because one of the questions this is the same thing that was presented to council on Monday. And Preston had pointed out that there was an issue with this number, but now it's higher. So I'm going to have to look into that. Oh no, it was this one. Okay, I still haven't looked into this. I did answer Preston's other 2 questions. I am going to drill down to the police department. He had questions on the police department's salaries. So I have been saying for a long time that the police department salaries, since they have been understaffed, have been a large savings for the city, budgeted savings. And we are getting closer to fully staffed, which is great. And Preston looked and said, then why are we spending less money on PD salaries? And so I looked into it, and there are 2 reasons behind this. The first is that city staff get paid bi-weekly. So we get 26 paychecks a year, which does not divide evenly between 4 quarters. So we were paid 7 times in quarter 1 and 7 times in quarter 2 and only 6 times in quarter 3. PD salaries for 1 paycheck average $140,000. So that's a huge portion of the difference there. Another part of that is that overtime costs were down drastically for quarter 3. Overtime costs in quarter 1 were $108,000, in quarter 2 were $163,000, and then in quarter 3 were only $75,000. So that's what the difference is between those numbers and why it looks like there's a drastic decrease in Q3, even though I'm saying that we're spending more in salaries. It's specifically because we didn't get paid as many times last quarter. So I wanted to point that out. And then he also had a question about this mass of green. So I have been trying to come up with a way to show the relationship between the Emergency Medical Services Fund and the general fund costs for fire for a while. And this is how I've settled and now I'm going to try to work harder to refine. But these numbers don't detail out revenues and expenses. These numbers do detail out revenues and expenses and then pull out that transfer that we were talking about, because the transfer is kind of doubling up. It's artificially, increasing the cost of the fire department. And then these numbers do not break out revenues and expenses. It breaks out the transfer, but it lumps revenues and expenses into one line. So that's why, part of why there was a difference between the numbers down here and then the numbers up here. Another was this formula was wrong. This spreadsheet is very large, and as many times as I review it, I'm always finding, little things. So one of these formulas was incorrect, and it was including the transfer. It was including the transfer twice. So I've updated these numbers for when we bring the biennial budget. I'm also looking at how to present this to be a little bit more clear. I might just get rid of the transfer altogether. I'm not really sure how I'm going to present it. But when I first started and I brought my first quarterly report, I tried to detail out special revenues, budget to actuals. They're not budgeted the same way as the general fund, really. They have a lot of special appropriations that happen throughout the year. And they also often spend more than they bring in any given year, specifically because they have larger fund balances to allow them to do that when they have larger projects. So it was really confusing for people when I brought the operating budget and the special revenue budgets together. And I haven't had time to come back around and try to figure out how to present it in a way that is easy for people to understand. This was an attempt at that, and because both the EMS fund and the general fund are operating funds, even though the EMS fund is a special revenue fund, we basically use it as an operating fund. And it's something that the auditors have pointed out before that, we might want to look at how we handle this, but this is how it's been done for quite some time. So I haven't changed it. But I was trying to show the relationship between the two, because if you just show the general fund, it looks like the fire department only costs, $1 million, when in reality, it costs the $1 million plus the amount in the EMS fund. So I'm going to be trying to do some of the same things in public works with the biennial budget, because the sewer fund, which is, funded by the assessment, includes some of those same items where some public works staff are split between the two. I'd love to have them all in the general fund, but enterprise funds require that we account for them separately. So I'm working on this.
So, so Heather, I want to stop you right there just to be sure that I'm following this conversation. As I understand it, your goal and what you're trying to do in restructuring these line items is to really display for the public and for auditors and anybody who looks at it, the total costs of fire and public works.
Yes.
And the challenge is that there are additional revenue sources and expenses charged to those revenue sources that has to be included under the separate line item. Is that, have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think, I understand your problem, and I think I would like to see a total cost, and I don't know how you total it all out, but it would be helpful, I think, to understand why certain things are captured in certain line items, and is there consistency year over year as to what goes into general fund and what goes into EMS fund, that we can rely on, that those numbers are the same year after year. So good on you. Keep going.
Trying.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Heather? And maybe this is something that I'm only interested in. I'm just having a little bit of trouble following, which are the pluses and which are the minuses on the schedule. And maybe you want to just walk me through it later, but I was kind of trying to come up with, the revenue obviously is an offset to the expense, and the transfer to EMS looks like it would be an expense. But like if you just look at the column on the left, the 2020 actuals, so you've got the top line item is the 2.548 million. And that would be comprised of the general fund and the EMS fund, the 2.139 and the 409,000. But how do you get to that 2,139,000 number from the numbers that are below it? I was trying to figure out.
So it's these two.
It's just those two. Okay, so the transfer to EMS doesn't factor in.
So they offset each other. So
Okay.
I just didn't include it
Okay.
because I didn't want to. And in doing that, I think this is where I've confused things. So I need to figure out how I'm going to do that going forward. I'm wondering if I need to think about it.
Okay. And maybe, for me, it might, I don't know, I'm sure you've been struggling with this thing for a while, but like maybe seeing the signs going opposite ways, for the revenue and the expenses. So you could tell when you're trying to flip this document, what's supposed to go which way.
And so this accounting system that we use actually does that. Revenues are all negative.
Okay.
That confuses the general public.
Okay. And then the other question was, I was trying to tie this back to your citywide revenues and expenses, your great title page that you have, which is page 1 of 27 of your report, where it shows that the fiscal year 2021 amended budget for fire would be $3,633,682.
Yep. So this is only the general fund.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this excellent presentation? Thank you, Heather. If not, we can once again check and see if there's any public comment.
I think member public.
Questions? Right.
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Francisco.
Okay. There was a lot in here to be clarified here. The finance department, on page 3, finance department 2020 actuals is 1.5. 2021 amended budget is 1.1 million.
Yes.
So why is it, that's a significant drop in the budget? Is there a reason for that?
The salaries and benefits.
Did we lose a staff person?
No, I think if I'm remembering correctly, hold on, let me. There was an expense that was recorded there that was, yeah, there was an expense that was recorded there in error, but it needed to go somewhere, and this was where it ended up.
It ended up where?
In the salaries line for finance. We didn't lose anyone, but there were some adjustments that were made for audit purposes that ended up in this line.
There were adjustments made. It sounds like you had a shortage and you put it in there or something. That doesn't, what's an adjustment that you put in? I don't understand that.
So there were PERS costs that when we were going through some audit, you know, I don't want to confuse things. Let me look back at this and get back to you.
All right, and then there was income in property taxes seem to be going down. Why is that?
So property tax.
So is the assessed value of the town going up?
Yes, the assessed value of the town is going up.
And do you have a year-over-year increase in assessed value of the town?
Yes. Not off the top of my head, but we
Okay.
do have that.
I mean, I'm a real estate agent, so that's the kind of thing I see happening literally every day
Mhm.
in my work. So I'm trying to see how, and I see it happening. I see properties selling, that had assessed values of 100,000 selling for 1.1 million or even more. So there's an extra $1 million in assessed value. So why would we be getting less property tax?
So
Something changed?
there are a couple of different things. Even though a house sells for $1 million, they may have been able to carry over their basis. So the tax might not be on that full amount. But the amount that we are collecting is going up year over year. The reason that it doesn't appear to be where it should be right now is because we didn't get our second large property tax payment from the county until April, which is in fourth quarter, not third quarter.
Does that relate to where you had mentioned I think on page 3 of your report, that the city had only collected 56% of budgeted revenues? Is that mainly property tax outstanding?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not a collectability issue. We know it's coming. It's just a timing.
Exactly.
Well, that isn't what I read. So we had a fiscal year 1920 for 8.1, but we have a budgeted for 7.9. Why would we budget for less if the value is going up?
We budgeted this before we finished the year. So before we knew exactly how much we were bringing in property tax, or before we knew exactly how much we were collecting in property tax, we had already budgeted. So you'll see in the next year that that number increases.
Right. But in general, I would really love to see at some point in the future a 10-year run of assessed value of the town to see how it works, if we can at some point.
So that information is available in the CAFR. the audited financial statements that are available online.
Okay. Well, I think the public would like to know too. I mean, that's a source of revenue. I mean, in terms of analyzing, how our revenue streams, it appears to me that real estate is one of the prime sources of revenue, both in property taxes and transfer taxes.
Mhm.
And the transfer tax, which we just increased from 1.1% to 1.5%, that increase in revenue is represented where in this? Revenue?
So the the transfer taxes are under franchise and other taxes. So it's lumped in with a bunch of other stuff. And this did include an increase in the transfer tax. It included an increase in the UUT, but there were some items that went down as well. So the overall it was an increase, but not as much as you would have thought. Also for 2021, the transfer tax increase happened halfway through the year. So we are only recognizing half of whatever the annual amount projected was. The UUT increases, for the most part, happened in March, and then the water should have kicked in April, but that has not happened yet.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions as well before we open it up to public, if
And
Publi is done with his questions.
Yep, and I did want to, at one point you had mentioned collectability. Because of the pandemic, the county did increase the amount that they withhold, assuming non-payment slightly. I think the TDOR amount used to be, they increased it from like 3 to 5% or something like that. So it is this very small amount that they assume will be uncollected.
So they think it's 5% of.
I think I can double check.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions. When you're ready.
Please go ahead.
Okay, page 7, neighborhood services. It's a small item. I was just I'm not quite sure what that is. And then non-departmental expenses seems like a pretty big item.
Mhm.
And I don't know what that is.
So neighborhood services is the CARES, Albany CARES, and it's basically Sid Schoenfeld. He works with the police sometimes to help with certain situations. He works with the homeless. He works with seniors and just helping with it's called neighborhood services or
Who is it? Who?
Sid.
Oh, this is Sid. I thought he was in the senior, but he's not in that. Okay.
Well, he is now the manager of the senior center, but also handles the neighborhood services, which part of his salary goes to both. Neighborhood services is more the part of his job that isn't related specifically to seniors. It's related to helping the general community.
And he's also the one that manages the rent review board.
Yes,
And is that in budgeted under this part, neighborhood services?
yes.
Okay.
Rent review and the tax, they help with the tax exemption for homeowners and the tax rebate for renters.
Okay.
And then the non-departmental,
Yeah.
non-departmental is everything that doesn't fit into a department. So it's most of the large taxes. I mean, I could take credit for all the property taxes, but I mean, since they're generally just like citywide items that aren't specific to a department. So for example, under retirement, that's your unfunded pension liability payment.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Non-department.
That's kind of important.
Yep.
And there it's going up. So it's 1.8, then it's 2.1.
And next year it's going to be 2.4, and then 2023, I think it goes up to 2.8.
Well, that's why I don't like this I mean, lumping stuff into a category like that is not, okay, it's sometimes hard to understand.
Well, there's really no way to tease it out. I could do safety. Like I said, we have different plans. We have safety plans, and we have, so some for police and some for fire. They would be really easy to break out. The problem is it's almost impossible for me to break out what the miscellaneous, which is everyone except for police and fire, is. And it's not really fair to lump those expenses into police and fire, but not do it for everyone else. That's why I put it under non-departmental, because I think it would overstate police and fire's budget unfairly if we recorded that there.
How does that roll up into your budget summary on page 1, that non-departmental?
That is under general government. I think that's,
You're talking about the staff report?
of course, it died.
On page 1 of the budget to actual. So it's in the general government line item, which is the first expenditure line item. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll reshare it as soon as I can open it again. My connection to the network's dropped. Give me 1 second. But yeah, it's under general government.
And member Trainer, I think, member Papalia, are you still have more questions, or are you
Well,
finished?
so are we going to be the staff report is, I mean, I have the staff report that I went through. So I think she kind of went right into the budget. Or maybe those texts. Because one thing I took out of this, just to kind of understand things, is that it says that like 72% of the budget goes to salaries, and salaries and benefits account for 71.9% of the budget.
Correct.
So understanding how those things change, expand and contract, or as salaries go up, or as we hire people, that's the biggest part of that's over 2/3 of the budget, or 3/4 of the budget. It's like, so, we can fiddle around that doesn't leave much to fiddle with to cover everything else. And that's one of the things that I took out of this.
That is staff's problem all around. When we look at things to cut, we're looking at, buying less pens because we've done cuts already to certain things. So when you think about what government does, we're all service, except for public works. They but a lot of their stuff is outside of general fund. But police, yeah, they buy, they fuel their cars and they have some smaller equipment, but their entire thing is the service of providing public safety. Fire is the same thing. They have equipment, but the majority of what your cost is going to be is having that person available to show up at your house when you call 911. The same thing with, if you think about the city manager, standing out there and making sure that everything is running smoothly, and finance, making sure that bills get paid and things get recorded. I don't buy that many pens, but when you look at our budget, the majority of what a government is staff. And so when we're trying to cut, we really try not to cut positions. So when we look at our budget and we're talking, we go back to department heads and say, you have to cut, this much money or whatever. They're getting down to how many pens, how much paper am I buying, how many, widgets, when 72% of the budget is staffing. So it's very hard to make the large cuts needed. And that's why I said at some point, we might have to come back to you guys and say what services are really worth it if we continue to have a deficit and can't find any more revenue.
Okay.
Well, one last question on page 3 of the report.
Mhm.
And I think we've discussed it, but I'm still, it's the pension tax override fund.
Yes.
I keep getting confused with what the different, the different pension this or pension that. There are approximately 2.6 million in transfers that are scheduled for year end.
Yes.
So the pension tax override fund is paid for from where to cover what?
So the pension tax override comes in on the property with property taxes and is recorded in a special revenue fund that is specific to the pension override tax. That basically, it has its own budget that is approved when the city council approves the rest. The city council sets the rate each year, and at that time approves how we're going to spend it. So it sits in that pension tax override fund until we either, I think so far this year, we have paid half of the unfunded liability payment for the closed police and fire pension plan. We are planning on paying a $500,000 additional contribution to the PERS unfunded liability. We finally got the second property tax payment, so I'm going to pay the second half of the closed police and fire pension plan unfunded liability payment, which transfers from the pension tax override fund to the pension plan itself. And the rest sits there until I can do the calculation at the end of the year that we talked about in my previous presentation, where I say, okay, how much did we spend on pensions? Now that includes the unfunded liability. It also includes the current pension costs for safety. And I said, how much did we actually spend? How much of that applies? So how much of it is the benefit associated with, the same benefit that was received in 1971? So how much of that can I reimburse? And then I make the transfer at the end of the year, whichever is higher is the amount that council approved, or whichever is lower, the amount that council approved or the amount that I am of expenses that I actually had.
Okay. And so the pension tax is on my tax bill?
Yeah. It's an ad valorem tax.
An ad valorem tax. So as property values increase, we get more on the pension
Correct.
Okay.
And when you say that the amount of the reimbursement is set at that 1971 pension reimbursement amount, are you talking about a flat dollar amount or a percentage of compensation?
So it's the benefit provided. So at that time, it was similar to, I think, 2% per year of service up for so many years. And now there's one plan that allows for 3%. So I can only reimburse 2/3 of the cost instead of the full amount.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a quick question. So this has to do with the sort of the summary at the beginning, not these spreadsheets, but just the beginning, the bar charts. Were you going to go over those separately, or can I just ask a question about them?
You can ask a question now about them.
Yeah. Okay. So like on the first page or two, there was a page that it just kind of showed the expenses over a 4 or 5 year period.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just looking for maybe a 10,000 foot view. What happened to make it go from 9 million to 13? Like, I don't need a lot of detail, but just like there must have been some very big things that happened.
So a lot of it is the unfunded pension liability. It has increased drastically. Salaries are also increasing. Insurance has increased. And this is all, this year to date is just quarters 1 through 3. So anything that is paid at the beginning of the year, which is all those massive things, are going to hopefully even out a little bit more. Obviously not fully, but it's a lot of those bigger costs that are all happening, July and August, that really attributes to that massive increase. There is also one other thing that we did this year, which is why you see the difference in 20 to 21, is in public works. In order to make it easier for people to understand the budget, we brought a lot of the things that I was talking about earlier, where I said, anything that we're going to spend, regardless of where the money comes from, we're going to record in the general fund. We didn't always do that. And things were budgeted across funds. And it was really hard for staff to monitor their budgets because, they had parks maintenance in the general fund and in 3 other special revenue funds. And so they were like, all right, well, let me just go through the list and figure out where I have money left now. And we were over budgeting a lot of things because we didn't have a full picture spread out across a lot of things. We moved all that into the general fund. But what we did to offset a lot of that was we recorded revenues. So those transfers, that haven't necessarily happened yet. Some of them have. The ones that I can make, a lot of the public works ones. So the revenues should also, you'll notice in public works specifically, the revenues increase almost the same that the expenses increased. But the majority of what you're seeing is just the increase in major costs like the pension, unfunded pension payment and insurance.
Okay, so if I can repeat that back, I think part of it is true expense going up and part of it is you're expanding what's being included in general fund that in the past was included in other funds.
Correct.
Is that right? And then, yeah, so maybe you already answered this, but if you scroll down to the revenue, there was also a very big increase. So part of that is that you're expanding what's general fund revenue because you're including some transfers. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So does that explanation also explain then why the public works budget went up by so much for this year? Because you're pulling things from all those other special revenue areas?
That's part of it. Part of it also, the parks maintenance increased because we had that new tax measure that we are actually starting to realize. So the measure M, I think, the Parks and Open Space parcel tax, passed in 2018. We didn't start collecting it until, so it passed the end of 18. So it wasn't on the tax bill until the bill that you would receive at the end of 19. So we didn't start collecting it until sometime in 20. So now we're actually starting to use it. And so part of the increase is moving items from special revenue into the general fund, but part of it is because we've actually expanded the amount of parks maintenance that we're doing.
I also have just a couple of, I'm going to say 3 general questions. This report is really helpful and goes a long way towards helping us understand this. I'm just wondering about the things that are not on the report. For example, like a statement of financial position or balance sheet. Is it customary to produce one of those on an interim basis or really only at year end?
Really only at year end.
Okay. And one of the reasons why I asked about that was because there was mention of targeting 25% of current year annual operating expense into reserve fund balance. And so just wondering where are we on that reserve?
So with the budgeted deficit, assuming that we realized the budgeted deficit, which I will say right now, I do not think that we are going to, we would be at the 25%, if just below.
Okay.
We have enough in there to realize the current year's deficit, if it happens.
Okay, so that means that we must have been above 25% going into this fiscal year?
Correct.
So we've been spending down some of that reserve.
Correct. Last year we did realize a surplus. We did not realize a deficit, but we have budgeted a deficit. And like I said, a large part of that was, well, there were a couple of things that went into it. One, we got Federal CARES Act money. One, the police salary savings, and then a little bit extra, a little bit more of savings was that Public Works was still at the time ramping up like their capacity, so they weren't necessarily running at full capacity. And so there were some savings in the Public Works budget that, a lot of that is going to go away as we come out of the pandemic and we start doing more stuff for, internally. We have been doing a lot of paving and everything, but that's not part of the general fund.
Okay. And so I guess the last question then is, given that I know you mentioned that we've typically been able to eliminate some of the budget deficit because there were positions that went unfilled in police and fire. And you've indicated that it looks like those are going to be filled. So we probably can't count on recouping some of our deficit for that when we go into our next biennial budget period. So just wondering, is the plan to try not to budget with a budget deficit for this next biennial budget, given that, it's unlikely that we'll have that sort of cushion?
So staff is doing everything that they can to reduce the amount of the deficit. The city has budgeted at a deficit since fiscal year 19. And even before that, it was starting to get really close. The staff is doing everything that they can to reduce that deficit. Like I said earlier, at some point, it may come back and say, what services do you want if we can't find any additional revenue? We're hoping that we can bring back I think it was the ALS, the Advanced Life Support tax that did not pass this last time. We're hoping that we can bring that back to the ballot in the future, potentially with a couple of updates. And we, again, are hoping that we can update the business license tax to bring in a little bit more revenue. We are going to try to shift the tax burden from small businesses to larger businesses by going to a tax based on gross receipts instead of based on employees. These are all things that, you know, we're going to talk to you guys about and then talk to the council about and say, okay, here are the options. Here's what we think. What do you want to do? Do you want to move forward with it? You know, we're trying to find more revenue before we have to, you know, make cuts to personnel.
Would that shift in the business tax procedure require a vote, or is that something that can just be done?
It would have to go to voters.
Great, thank you, really helpful.
I'm gonna just check and see if there are any other comments from the committee members. We still have one member of the public online, and we can go to public comment at this point if there are no further questions or comments. Everybody okay with going ahead? Okay, great. And again, Heather, I want to thank you for a very excellent presentation. And thank the committee members as well for excellent questions. So can we open it up for any public comment at this time?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, seeing no hands raised, this is a non-action item, so we're going to move to the next agenda item, which is 6.2. I'd just like to take a quick poll of the committee members and of Heather. Would it be helpful for cobweb purposes to take a 3-minute break at this point and give everybody a chance to reconvene, or are we good to go ahead and just plow through the work plan from here? If you would like a break, please put your thumb up and we can adjourn for 3 to 5 minutes. Seeing, okay, Mark needs a break and I wouldn't mind one myself. So we're gonna adjourn just very briefly. The time on my clock is 8:42. If we could come back at 8:45 and we'll finish with agenda item 6.2, 7, and 6.2, 7, 8, and then we'll adjourn at item number 9. So see you in 3 minutes. Okay. We are now at 8:45 and I'd like to call a meeting to order again. Thank you for humoring me with the idea of taking a short break. It really helps, I think, clear our minds to give us a moment to go from one topic to the next. I don't see Member Papalia back, so I'm going to wait until I see him in his little box. There he is. Great. He's back. And we're going to move on to the work plan, which is an attachment to our agenda. So if you could.
Before we do that, can we do 6-1, which is setting the July meeting date? It should be fairly easy.
Yes, we certainly can. What would that be, Heather, if we stayed true to our format of a Wednesday evenings? Would it be the 4th?
So normally it should be August, but unfortunately we don't normally have any meetings in August. So we would go back to July. And so we were looking at the calendar, and apparently there are a lot of meetings in July. And so the meeting date that's open that staff are recommending is Thursday, July 29th. That gives me time to put together the fourth quarter update because it's at the end of the month.
Would that date have us looking at the fourth quarter update before the council or after?
Before.
Okay, that works for me. Any other members have any comment on July 29th as a prospective date?
That works for me.
Yeah, it works for me too.
That could be fine for me. So we'll meet in July and then the council meets in September.
Correct.
Okay, so our next meeting will be July 29th, 7 p.m. and it might be in person, but we'll assume that we'll know by then. It might also be another Zoom meeting. It's hard to know. Okay. I'm still trying to pull up the actual draft of the work plan, so bear with me. Agenda and documents, 5.5.
Would you like me to share it?
That could work if this click doesn't. Oh, I got it. Okay, we're good. Why don't you share it also, though, because that I think coordinates our focus. Yeah, thank you.
Find the correct, this one, not that one. I have too many screens. All right, there you go.
Great, thank you. And I also wanted to refer the committee members to the comments that were submitted to public comment. And I'm going to take a few minutes to just kind of overview those by member Ann Benker, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. So she is apologizing that she can't attend, but she does have some recommendations. And one of the recommendations that she has as an addendum to our work plan is the development, or is having some way to capture, possibly on an annual basis, or the horizontal budgetary concerns that we've been talking about tonight in terms of shortfalls in pension funding. And I wonder if that will possibly just come up as a natural flow of the presentation of the annual budget. But if it doesn't, then we might want to consider, and we can discuss as a group, including that topic as a separate item. And her suggested titling of that would be Status Report of Budget Challenges, which certainly that is what we are going to be facing in the next 6 to 10 years. Another possible addition from Ann Benker is development of existing and new revenue streams as a topic, an agenda topic. And I think that we have talked about the fact that we are going to be talking about additional revenue streams and ways of enhancing revenue streams that we have. that are already existing without that. So I think we're going to be covering that in our agenda, as we have already discussed this evening, and is perhaps not fully captured in our work plan. So we may want to tweak the language of the work plan. And then she had some minor edits to the verbiage, which I'm not going to read out in detail, but I fully support these. And her goal is to sort of highlight the good work that's being done without creating an appearance of shortfall in the work that the finance department's doing, but rather sort of highlighting the successes of the finance department. And I think that's an excellent recommendation. So with that review of Ann Banker's comments, I would like to simply open it up to the larger, the present group, folks that are here tonight, for their comments on the work plan draft that we have before us tonight. So what do we have to say?
I'll start. First of all, I like it. I agree with the comments you just read, particularly about maybe tweaking it to make it more explicit that we do look at revenue sources or funding sources, because I didn't see that specifically in this. So I think just putting something in there on that. And then I would also just say, rather than just talking about potential budgetary issues, I would broaden it to just financial issues in general, because there could be issues with liquidity, or there could be any number of financial issues. And so I would rather just leave it broad in that way rather than just say budgetary.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on specifically where we might add those items under the, I mean, there's basically three major goals that we have, and I'm curious about what your thought is in terms of where the issues that you raise, which I support, might fit, and how we would language that.
Such a good question. I guess the last point about financial issues would be under that first bullet of sound and transparent management of city financial resources.
So possibly a fourth bullet that would capture that. Okay. Heather,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you, should I be taking notes and doing another draft, or can we work together on this, or should we do a draft tonight that we can then approve, and then we've got the work plan ready to go to council? I don't want us to have to look at it again if we can get it finalized tonight, or I'm not sure the process on this.
Yeah, I can pull up a draft of it in Word instead of in.
This would be on screen number 27, probably.
And then you can just say, you can just motion that somebody motion that they move it with changes.
Go ahead, Mark.
What exactly?
Sure. So the FAC will review and report to council significant financial short and long-term issues facing the city, something like that.
I can all see how fast, but how poorly I type.
Okay, great, good, thank you, Mark. And then
the second one on the rates. So I guess that would be under the third bullet, where it says assure rates of revenue are kept current, the revenues are collected. And I would just say that and explore additional sources of revenue for the city.
Explore and recommend.
Sure.
To council.
So I have a question. So you're talking about coming up with ideas for funding for revenue, like taxes or fees?
Yeah, and I thought, I think that's Member Papelli. I think you maybe even mentioned that in the last meeting, which made me think about it, was that maybe that's something that would be good for us to think about, how that might work in a way that doesn't overly burden, residents, but that we could explore.
Well, in that respect, part of the ordinance that created us, and then was specific wording that says review, and the committee shall review and make recommendations on all proposed bonds and other debt instruments to be issued by the city. And I would like to include that in. I mean, that's part of the work plan that was part of the ordinance. And what I've found in the past in following city government is that the bond issues, the city council may come up with it. It's a single item that they come up with, or there's something gets proposed. But the council it kind of gets lost, or it's hard to follow when it comes up in the council. It's like one of 10 things that's on the agenda, Well, if it's, and they don't really get and the public doesn't get a chance to give input to these bond measures and these tax measures, because, you have to sit through the whole meeting, and you get, and then you never know when it's going to come up or how long it's going to be. Well, the city council has already gave us pretty explicit wording that we could be doing that. So, review and make recommendations on all proposed bonds and other debt instruments to be issued by the city. And that should go under assure rates of revenue are kept current. And that would be under the new
So that last sentence that we just added, where it says explore, instead of explore and recommend, you'd say explore, review, and recommend. And then instead of additional sources, you'd want to be more explicit about bond and taxes. And is that what you're suggesting?
well, that's coming under, you're talking about in sound and transparent management.
No, we added a sentence to the third bullet as well.
I think there's actually a bullet under. I think that this continues on the next page with another bullet. Yeah. So I think what we could do is just end that as it already ended, and then the FAC will appoint a committee member to attend, and then another subcategory under that to capture the issue of funding mechanisms, additional sources of revenue. We could also talk about revenue enhancements. We could talk about the point I raised earlier about how do we know if the county is cutting us the correct amount from the transfer taxes. Those are all revenue enhancements that don't necessarily involve new taxes, but they involve understanding how the processes work and making sure that we're getting what we should. And if we're not, we know how to appeal that. Which is not to say I think we aren't, but I would like to know more about how that works. So So I think there's a couple more bullets that we can add under here that I'm hearing from Mark and Francisco. And I'm not going to come up with the words, so maybe somebody else can at this point. But
it seems almost to me that the sort of broader point where it starts with assure rates of revenue, maybe the caption there is something like revenue oversight or revenue recommendations or something. And then the bullet points would be to assure rates of revenue are kept current, first bullet point. Second bullet point, explore and recommend to council additional sources of revenue. Third bullet point about the bond review. And then you've got the FAC will appoint a committee member. It seems like there are four, aren't there sort of 4 bullet points having to do with revenue oversight?
I think that makes sense.
yeah, I think that's a good good strategy. Do you want to keep going there, Kim?
So what if instead of the sort of larger category that says assure rates of revenue are kept current, that's a big paragraph. What if we made the header for that section revenue oversight or some other word? And then there's a bullet for assure rates of revenue are kept current. And then we start a new bullet point to Mark's point of explore and recommend to council additional sources of revenue. So that's the second bullet point. And then to Francesco's point, we could copy in verbatim the verbiage about review of bond measures or bond proposals. That would be sort of bullet point number 3.
You want me to read it?
Yeah, like wouldn't that go in maybe, under so the on the next page it says the FAC will explore and recommend to council additional sources of revenue for the city, period. And then there would be another bullet point, maybe right after that, I guess, and you would read that.
Review and make recommendation on all proposed bonds or other debt instruments to be issued by the city. I mean, following that line in the ordinance that created us, it says, and may consider tax measures and other revenue opportunities as directed by the city council. So what they did was they gave a very specific shall review and then may consider tax measures that were directed from the city council. I mean, the work plan. So one question, who wrote this work plan? How did this work plan actually get written?
I took most of your notes, Francisco, and put them into this along with my notes from our meeting in May and drafted it. I'm not sure if Kim had a chance to review it or not, but I did send it to Heather and asked for further input if I could get it. So,
Right.
so I think it went out to everybody, didn't it? Didn't everybody take a look at this before?
I think it might have just been to me and you. I didn't have a chance to get to her before she had to post it.
That's fine. That's fine. We're working it now. So that's the history.
It's good, but I mean, it's my other members here want to be more broad, and I'm just trying to be more specific on certain things, that are included, so that we know. That's all. Just rather one's more general and one's more specific.
Okay. Does anybody have any other? So we're going to do revenue oversight, and Heather and other folks tonight have all talked about the fact that we may have some expense decision making for us soon, and I wonder if there's a way to capture that in a work plan that would allow us to address those issues, because we're anticipating that we might need to. So where would that responsibility be stated in a work plan?
Are you talking about the pension liability in particular?
I'm talking about FTE cuts, should we not be able to meet pencil diminishment goals.
Wouldn't that be covered by the FAC will review and report to council significant financial short and long-term issues facing the city?
Yeah, I guess you're right. It would. It's there. Good point. Thank you.
The one comment I have, I think, going back to Member Pelea's thing about sort of what we need to do and what we can do. If you go down to the next page, I hate to wordsmith, but that top bullet, maybe it should say the FAC may explore, because it's not really part of our mandate that we need to do this. It seems like the other things maybe we do need to do, but this is something that we may take up doing.
I agree. That's a good adjustment. Thank you. Anyone else comments on that?
Just one other comment from, and this is coming from the council meeting on Monday. There was a comment about work plans sometimes being really expansive and maybe too broad, and not being able to maybe get to all the points. And how do we feel about trying to prioritize this, or do we need to even try to prioritize these items on this work plan?
I've heard it just a general, I mean, from so many people on the committee here, this concern about the unfunded pension liability. That's why I think, I mean, we should just put it in. I would like to have it put in there just to see whether the city council wants us to do it or not. I mean, they may be delighted to have us do it because it's such a potentially hot topic, or that, anyway, so that's why it might be like with direction from, FAC may study the potential long-term unfunded pension liability as directed by the council. But giving them, then they can decide whether because this has to go to them, right? So we're putting together a plan that then will go to the city council. I hope everyone understands that. We're not making the plan. We're proposing a plan for the council to approve. Because that's every committee and commission has to have a work plan as approved by the city council. So we put stuff in that we may want to do, and they say yes or no. And if we're specific about something,
thank you. Thanks.
Good.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. All right, so we have a revision before us, and I think we've heard from everybody. I'd like to just take it from the top. If you could scroll up, Heather, and let us take a look at the whole thing. And then if people are comfortable with where we are with this, I would be happy to entertain a motion to approve the work plan to be presented to the city council for their review and their approval, as Francesco points out.
I do have one question. It says here, list items in order of priority, which was just part of the template for the work plan.
Uh-huh.
Are these listed in order of priority, or do you want me to just remove this?
When I wrote them, they were listed in order that they appeared on the city's, it's not called a work plan, but it's called something else. So these were the goals that the city had in their strategic plan. Thank you, Heather. And so I just copied and pasted from there. I thought the priority was implicit in the strategic plan, but it may not be for us. So good point. Do we want to flip them around anywhere? What's the most important thing we can do, even though it might not be the most important thing in the city's strategic plan?
I agree with the listing the sound and transparent management as the first item, because that really captures the budget and financial condition and reporting. And that seems to be of primary importance. And if we wanted to put in to call out this question of the unfunded pension liability. It seems like maybe it would be an additional bullet point in there. I like the idea of calling that out too, because it really does seem like it's going to be one of the major cost issues going forward. And it's not something we have any control over, so we might as well start dealing with it.
So you're proposing, Kim, that we just copy that and move it up to the first major bullet?
I would put it as maybe the fifth bullet point in that sound and transparent management of city financial resources, to a call out of the unfunded pension liability.
Perfect.
Can we just, one thing, can we just make it post-retirement? So that would include post-retirement health. I think that's a pretty small thing, but post-employment benefits.
OPEB.
And would you mind spelling out OPEB for us? Thanks.
It's other post-employment benefits.
Oh, that is, okay, got it. That's from here on after, I will now know. Thank you. Okay, great. So, so we've got sound and transparent management of city financial resources. We've got enhanced communication and transparency programs. We've got revenue oversight. Can you scroll down, please? I can't see the next page. Thank you.
I like it.
Question, where the California League of Cities meetings, where did that, it's very interesting. Where did that bullet point come from? Has anyone been to one of those, or knows? I know very little about it. I went to the website and it was,
I know that the California League of Cities is a source of information on what is happening in other municipalities, and it's referred to in council member reports in each of the meetings that the council has. I believe it's, I'm not sure who, there are two members. I think it's Nason and I'm not sure. Anyway, there are two current council members who are on the league. And they report to the full council. And when I went to the league website, I saw quite a few educational programs and topics on agendas that relate to fiscal management and financial information. And I thought that although it hasn't happened previously to my knowledge in any of the advisory bodies, I thought it would be interesting to see what the council thinks of having a third member from our committee be part of the California League to really focus in on the fiscal management issues. So where did it come from? I guess it came from my brain. And that was the reasoning behind it. So Member Priven, you nodded an affirmative. Is that a motion?
So moved.
We have a second.
I second it.
It was moved by Mark Priven and seconded by Francesco Papalia. Can we have a roll call, please?
Okay, so roll call. Member Papalia,
Aye.
Member Priven,
Yes.
Vice Chair Trainer,
Aye.
Chair Carr.
Aye.
Motion passes. Oh, did we want to see if there was public comment?
Oh,
We do. So we will vote again. And I'm sorry. Thank you for catching me on that. I should have gone there first. So we'd like to open this up now for any public comment on the draft of the work plan for the 2023 Fiscal Advisory Committee work plan. And we still have one attendee, and hands don't seem to be going up. So without repeating ourselves and having to vote again, I would like to simply reflect on the fact that we have no public comment and that we have voted in the affirmative to the work plan as revised. And Heather, I did want to be sure that we incorporated the comments that I read earlier, and I don't know that we've done that actually by scribbling it out in front of ourselves, but
Yeah, I can add the items that she enhanced transportation I'll add those and send it back to you and make sure that that's what.
I believe that all the committee members are in agreement with that. Could I just get a nod on that? Yeah.
yes.
Okay, great. Perfect. Therefore, we have a work plan to send to the city council, and they'll tell us if they want us to work or not. Great. And back to the agenda, if I can find it.
One point of order, please.
Please, go ahead.
I got a note from you that my video wasn't on. And if that was and I hit a button right away and turned it on. I had turned my video, I thought, to be minimized so that, or the pictures of everybody to be minimized so that I could see what was on the screen, the written stuff. So I may have accidentally turned off my video. And if I did that, I apologize, because I know that's it wasn't done intentionally to, because I know we should all be visible while we're participating.
I appreciate that comment. I think that's referred to as a Zoom boom.
Okay. Thanks for texting. Whatever you did, you got me. You did good. Thank you.
I think it might have been the support staff that did.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you
Good.
to them.
Support staff.
They're working hard for us. Okay, so future agenda items. Does anyone have any requests for future agenda items or topics we want to talk about?
I do.
Go ahead.
So I was sort of looking around to try to figure out how is the city doing just in general, and how do we compare to other cities? And I found some information from the state auditor that includes some very basic financial metrics of the city and all the other cities. And I know that for the next meeting or two, we're definitely going to be in the throes of the budget and so forth. But at some point, I think it would be nice to sort of review what the state auditor thinks are important metrics for the city to look at, and for us to reflect on how we're doing compared to other cities. So I'd like that to be a future agenda item, a few meetings from now.
Sounds good. And Mark, does that mean that if the city council approves the request to have a FAC committee member be part of the League of Cities, that you'd like to volunteer for that spot?
I didn't know how we went from one of those things to the
Oh,
other.
in my mind, it was a short circuit.
I mean, I'm interested. I don't know how often they meet and stuff. So
okay, all right. Well, your topic of what the state's presenting may be also an agenda item at the League of Cities meeting.
Yeah,
it might fit in nicely. So we'll keep you in mind.
I'm very interested in that. How do we compare to other cities?
Yeah.
And I think the public really should know that too. I mean,
not just in a competition level, but what can we learn from what they've done?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other thank you, Mark. Any other future agenda items from anyone? And is this a question I asked to the public? I see a hand up now. I'm going to request that if there are any future agenda items that the public would like to hear, that we hear them now.
Okay, so do you want me to open public comment?
Yes, yes, I do, please.
Okay, let me figure out how to do that. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to share the timer, and then here we go. All right, Jeremiah, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Yeah, a couple future agenda items. I'm just not sure how to go about this. I'm kind of doing all this by myself. It's really difficult. I've been trying to get Albany showers. I've got a portable shower trailer, and it's not going to cost the city any money to bring a portable shower trailer to Albany. I've got SOS showers from Richmond shower program. I volunteered today for 3 hours at Richmond Rescue Mission. And I was just wondering if there's any way to research a grant on for showers. And also the last thing is I've been working on school zones for over 10 years now. And there's a state school zone grant. And I'm pretty sure it's $100,000 to each city who has school zones in their municipal code book. But the state can't give the grant unless the word school zone is somewhere in the municipal code book. So I've been trying to do that for years, but it's a lot of work for myself. If anybody has an extra time to try to find that state school zone grant or call the state or something, I'll do it again and I'll try to send you an email. But if we could all work together, maybe a future agenda item could be how we can create some money or add to the budget for shower program or, school zones, how to get that grant from the state. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah Pinguelo, and thank you for the volunteer work that you do, especially. I do acknowledge and appreciate that work. Are there any other public comments out there tonight? Doesn't look like it. So with that, our next meeting is scheduled for June 2nd at 7 p.m. And we are hereby adjourned. Oh, do I have a motion for adjournment or can I just adjourn? I don't either.
No need for motion.
No need for a motion. Thank you, Ann. I was pretty sure about that. I thought you were out there. We're adjourned. Thank you.